Zack cut his finger while opening a soda can, purposely exposing the scent of blood to attract the attention of so that blood ancestor can come with his man. However, F quickly saw through the trick. He pulled out a gun and pressed it against Zack's head, unable to believe that Zack would betray him a second time. But in the end, F couldn't bring himself to pull the trigger. He told Zack to take care of himself, walked out of the room, and locked the door behind him. F came to his partner's side and then spilled the beans about Zack's betrayal. Upon hearing this, everyone immediately packed their belongings and left the place. Later, they rendezvoused with Roman and the others to discuss their next move. Zack must have had some kind of plan when he named the blood ancestor's location. The blood ancestor had probably moved away and possibly set traps. After hearing this, Quinlan decided to use a strategy of his own. After Quinlan heard this, he decided to go to the Empire State Building alone to draw out the blood ancestor. If the blood ancestor entered the explosion range, there would be a chance to eliminate him once and for all. Quinlan obtained the detonator for the nuclear bomb from Roman and decided to sacrifice himself along with the blood ancestor. Upon hearing Quinlan's plan, the others agreed that it was the only way. The group transported the bomb to the Empire State Building, and Quinlan went in alone to find out where the blood ancestor was. On the rooftop, they found the blood ancestor, and the others immediately detonated the nuclear bomb. At this moment, the blood ancestor and his vampire army found Zack. They were angry to learn that Zack had failed in his mission. Meanwhile, Desai was arguing with his wife when the door was suddenly pushed open by the blood ancestor. Seeing the scars on Desai's face, the blood ancestor knew he had been tortured. He immediately questioned Desai about whether he had betrayed him. Desai, terrified, denied any betrayal. However, Zack claimed that Desai had revealed everything. They already knew that the nest was in the Empire State Building, which angered the blood ancestor. Desai quickly shifted all the blame onto his wife. Before she could defend herself, the blood ancestor grabbed her by the throat and snapped her neck. Witnessing his wife's death, Desai quickly composed himself. He told the blood ancestor that he would never reveal any information. The blood ancestor knew full well that it was Desai who betrayed him by pinning him against the wall. Quinlan arrived at the base of the Empire State Building. Upon entering the lobby, he saw no sign of any vampires. He took the elevator to the top floor, but it was empty, except for the scattered soil where the blood ancestor had rested. At that moment, Abby emerged from upstairs. With the blood ancestor's consciousness transferred into her body, Quinlan immediately informed Vasily and the others about the situation. When Vasily asked what to do next, the blood ancestor summoned a group of vampires to surround Quinlan. Quinlan glanced back and began taunting the blood ancestor.
Is this the best you can do? Dispatching these vermin, instead of having the courage to face me yourself?
Blood ancestor was not fooled at all after hearing this, because he knew that Quinlan and others wanted him to enter the explosion range of the nuclear bomb. With their plan exposed, Quinlan swiftly decapitated Abby. He contacted Vasily on the radio and urged everyone to evacuate with the nuclear bomb. Meanwhile, the feelers had already discovered Vasily and the others. Suddenly, hordes of vampires emerged. Everyone quickly raised their guns. Gus instructed F and the others to safely transport the nuclear bomb while he and the rest of the group held off the vampire army. To prevent the nuclear bomb from falling into the hands of the blood ancestor, Vasily and the others immediately drove away from the scene.
Where are they coming from, man? Keep shooting, keep shooting!
The powerful firepower successfully held off the vampire attack, but Cream was accidentally bitten on the neck. Gus immediately killed the vampire, but it was already too late. The virus had already begun spreading within Cream's body. Just then, another group of vampires surged forward. Gus prepared to pull out a hand grenade, but in the next moment, Cream snatched it away. He knew he didn't have much time left and decided to go down with the vampires. Holding the hand grenade, he charged into the vampire army. Another group of vampires emerged from behind, but Gus didn't have time to retrieve the weapons in the car. He quickly led his teammates into an alley to escape. Quinlan, facing the swarming vampires, remained calm. He pulled out 2 guns and began firing relentlessly. In a matter of seconds, all the vampires were annihilated. At that moment, the blood ancestor controlled another vampire to appear behind Quinlan. Quinlan was growing impatient. On the other side, the blood ancestor learned that Vasily and the others had successfully escaped, which made him angry. He called Zach over and told him that his father didn't really care about him. Betrayal to save stupid humans is a selfish person. The blood ancestor decided to show Zach something outside. Soon, they arrived at the rooftop, and when the blood ancestor raised his hands, the vampires below became excited. They would search the entire city for the location of the nuclear bomb, which would be the final battle between the two sides. Meanwhile, Vasily and the others arrived at the predetermined meeting point. They got out of the car and began to survey the area. Just then, Dutch was startled by Quinlan. Vasily turned on the lights to assure everyone that it was a safe place and led them into an elevator. As the elevator descended, Vasily explained the situation to everyone. They were in New York City's third water tunnel, which reached a depth of 240 meters. It was supposed to be completed this year, but due to the vampire invasion, it had been abandoned. Now, it was the safest place to store the nuclear bomb. On the other side, Gus was trapped in a house after his retreat, surrounded by vampires. It was difficult to escape as the area outside was filled with vampires. Unfortunately, all their weapons were in the car, so they had to find a way to get the car and leave. After hearing this, the group decided to rest and make plans. But just then, Roman noticed that Marcus seemed off and immediately asked him what was wrong. Marcus claimed it was just a bit of a fever, but Gus was alarmed. He walked up to Marcus, and when Marcus looked up, his eyes were filled with bloodshot veins. Realizing that he couldn't hide it any longer, Marcus admitted that he had been accidentally bitten. To prevent the location of the nuclear bomb from being exposed, Gus pulled out his gun and shot Marcus on the spot. Unable to control his anger after losing his close friends one after another, Gus became uncontrollable. Roman quickly stepped in to stop him, hoping Gus could calm down first. Gus was surrounded by a horde of vampires as he tried to take back the car. Without hesitation, Gus slammed the accelerator and crashed into the vampire army. The vampires used their bodies to block the incoming car. Gus immediately rushed out from another weak point. Meanwhile, Quinlan found Vasily and informed him that he had foreseen their victory but needed Vasily to give his full strength. Quinlan recognized Vasily's determination to achieve their goal, and thus, this plan required Vasily's full support. After discussing the plan, they found F and the others. Vasily then addressed everyone, stating that if they intentionally exposed their location, the blood ancestor would surely lead the vampire army to attack. At that moment, Quinlan would find a way to lure the blood ancestor here, while Vasily would be responsible for detonating the nuclear bomb. Detonating the bomb here would cause no harm to the entire New York City, as it couldn't penetrate the bedrock at a depth of 240 meters. Upon hearing this, Dutch called out Vasily. In Dutch's heart, Vasily had always been the one she loved the most. She couldn't bear to see Vasily sacrifice himself to save humanity. Seeing Dutch's concern, Vasily embraced her and kissed her. Then, Dutch tried to persuade Vasily to reconsider, but Vasily made it clear that he wouldn't easily change his mind. Respecting Vasily's decision, Dutch had no choice but to accept it. Soon, Gus arrived at the rendezvous point and joined the others. He said the whole street was full of vampires and they were searching from house to house. If they had any plan, they needed to execute it quickly before the vampires found their location. Seeing this, the group immediately started preparing for the plan. First, F and Vasily pretended to patrol outside. After a long wait, they finally encountered a vampire scout. With the successful completion of the first step of the plan, they headed back to the base. This way, the blood ancestor would be able to learn their hiding place. At the same time, the blood ancestor had learned the location of the vampire hunting team through his spies. He immediately gathered all the vampires, preparing to launch an attack at night. As long as they could disarm the nuclear bomb, humanity would be completely finished. He decided to personally lead the team there. Just as the blood ancestor was preparing to set off, Zach called out to him. Then he ran into his room, took the gun that the blood ancestor had given him, and walked out. He expressed his desire to join the fight. Seeing Zach's determination, the blood ancestor felt very pleased. On the other side, the vampire hunting team had made all the necessary preparations. Quinlan began instructing everyone to fight while retreating. This way, they could not only weaken the vampire army but also lead the blood ancestor to the elevator entrance. Upon hearing the plan, the group immediately went into ambush positions. Soon, several vampire scouts arrived at the factory. Roman and Gus opened fire upon seeing them. After dealing with these vampires, more and more of them flooded in. After firing at the vampire army, Roman and Gus retreated deeper into the factory according to the original plan, just as the vampires were chasing after them. F and Vasily, who were lying in wait, immediately emerged. The vampire army suffered heavy casualties, but their numbers were still overwhelming as they continued to charge into the factory. This scene was witnessed by the Blood Ancestor, who had just arrived. With a command from the Blood Ancestor, all the vampires rushed into the factory. Seeing the dense enemy numbers, Gus took out a hand grenade and threw it. In the next second, the grenade exploded, tearing the vampire army apart. But before everyone could catch their breath, the Blood Ancestor and another group of vampires charged in again. At this moment, F noticed Zack by the side of the Blood Ancestor. Just then, Gus pulled F away to retreat. Upon seeing this, the Blood Ancestor ordered the entire vampire army to follow. And so, the vampires walked into the ambush points that Vasily had set up in advance. Immediately, Vasily took out the last hand grenade and threw it. In the next second, the grenade exploded among the vampire horde. Silver powder fell on the vampires, causing a burning sensation that instantly rendered them unable to fight. The group quickly rushed out and began clearing the vampires. At this moment, the Blood Ancestor's throat moved, emitting a kind of ultrasonic wave. Humans who heard it would feel dizzy. This caused Vasily and the others to lose their ability to resist on the spot. Just as the Blood Ancestor was feeling triumphant, the uncontrollable Quinlan suddenly charged out from the side. He directly barged into the elevator with the Blood Ancestor and Zack, then suppressed the Blood Ancestor. Without the interference of the ultrasonic waves, everyone immediately stood up and launched a counterattack. At this time, F saw Zack on the elevator, at a loss for what to do. As soon as he stepped forward, Vasily and Dutch quickly closed the elevator door and the elevator fell down. Now, the plan was left with the final step, which required Vasily to go down and detonate the nuclear bomb. While Dutch and Vasily bid their final farewells, F slipped into the elevator. Seeing this, Vasily immediately ran towards the elevator entrance. The two of them knew that F went there for Zack, but they didn't know if F would give up detonating the nuclear bomb to save Zack. At this moment, Gus announced that more vampires were charging in. Dutch and Vasily immediately plunged back into the battle. Meanwhile, Zack woke up after reaching the underground. He didn't see the figures of the Blood Ancestor and Quinlan. He only heard the intense sound of fighting outside the elevator. At this time, Quinlan and the Blood Ancestor were engaged in a fierce battle. Both were using all their strength to attack. Quinlan had been waiting for this battle for 1,000 years. In order to kill the Blood Ancestor, Quinlan had made thorough preparations. In front of the Blood Ancestor, Quinlan was slightly inferior. Although he managed to dodge a fatal blow, Quinlan accidentally injured his arm. The Blood Ancestor grabbed Quinlan and threw him to the ground. Then, the Blood Ancestor pulled him up and unleashed a brutal beating. At this point, Quinlan had lost all ability to resist. Although Quinlan managed to tear out a flesh spike from the Blood Ancestor, he was already powerless to fight back. The Blood Ancestor was now filled with anger. After being attacked by Quinlan, his body was on the verge of collapse. He approached Quinlan and, after bidding his final farewell, lifted his foot. Just like that, Quinlan was stepped on by his Blood Ancestor and his head exploded. At the same time, F accidentally bumped his head and passed out while the elevator was descending. When he woke up, he immediately stepped out of the elevator. The prepared nuclear bomb was right in front of him, but it was only when F turned around that he noticed the presence of the Blood Ancestor and Zack standing there. Fortunately, the two of them didn't notice F's presence. At this time, the Blood Ancestor stood in front of Quinlan's body and mocked without knowing it. F immediately walked towards the nuclear bomb, but the sound of the door closing still attracted the attention of the they. Zack fired a shot next to F's head, which deeply saddened F. He couldn't believe that Zack would actually shoot at him. At that moment, the Blood Ancestor gestured to Zack to take action, believing that killing F would bring peace to the world. Zack hesitated for a moment, but ultimately put down his gun. Then, Zack turned the gun towards the Blood Ancestor and opened fire. Seeing Zack successfully buying him more time, F prepared to detonate the nuclear bomb. However, the Blood Ancestor crawled back up once again. His body was on the verge of collapsing, and he grabbed Zack, preparing to switch bodies. Just as the Blood Ancestor was about to succeed, F rushed over and pushed the Blood Ancestor away. The two of them immediately engaged in a fight. The Blood Ancestor took the opportunity to start replacing the body. As the final bloodworm entered F's body, the blood ancestor collapsed to the ground. Meanwhile, Vasily and the others were still resisting the vampire army above. At this moment, the vampires all stood motionless in their places. Dutch and the others drew two conclusions from what they witnessed. Either the blood ancestor had died, or he was in the process of replacing the body. Taking advantage of this opportunity, they prepared to break through the vampire encirclement. After Zack kicked the blood ancestor aside, he crouched beside F. F quickly regained consciousness from his unconscious state. At this point, the blood ancestor's consciousness had not fully taken over F's body. With Zack's support, F stood up. They immediately headed towards the nuclear bomb. Just as F inserted the detonation key into the bomb, a roaring sound echoed in his head. Immediately, he lost all ability to move. When F looked up again, the blood ancestor had completely taken control of his body. Zack knew that the blood ancestor controlled his father's body, so he hugged F in order to make him relax his guard. After bidding farewell to F, Zack pressed the button on the nuclear bomb. The resulting blast wave caused Vasily and the others to stagger. With the death of the blood ancestor, vampires all over the world became extremely feeble-minded, making it easy to exterminate them. It took humanity 5 years to eliminate all the vampires from around the world. Life returned to peace once again for everyone. Roman became the largest real estate developer in Manhattan. Gus returned to the countryside and helped numerous refugees, enabling them to return to their homes. Vasily and Dutch lived happily ever after.